This is the Recruit the Employer podcast, and you're listening to episode 102. Here's how to overcome your fear of networking. Welcome to the Recruit the Employer podcast, a show for the ambitious, action-oriented career woman who wants to live out her purpose, rise to the top of her industry, and be seen as a leader at work. In 30 minutes or less, we'll walk you through the latest strategies to land your dream job, blast through imposter syndrome, and make the money you deserve. I'm your host, Jena ex-Wall Streeter turned career coach and founder of Recruit the Employer. But more importantly, I'm on a mission to help you fall in love with your work again. So grab a glass of wine, get ready to be coached, and tune in to your weekly boost of career confidence. Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Recruit the Employer podcast. I am so very excited to be with you here today. If you have not heard, we have officially launched the Career Map Journal. If you want to get some more details about what exactly is in that journal, why journaling, I believe, is so important and crucial for the longevity of your career, for the health of yourself, and to minimize stress, you need to listen to yesterday's episode. I walked through what exactly is included in the journal, why you need to be journaling in your career, and some more details that you need to know about. We are so excited. I'm looking at the journal right now. It is beautiful. I mean, I'm not just saying that because I designed it, but I really just believe it's a great asset to your career. It's cheap. It's easy. It's one of the best ways that you can keep track of what you're doing throughout your week so you don't feel like a failure. You can start celebrating the things that you're really good at in your career. And also it's going to help you get some career clarity on what do you actually want to do next. I know that for a lot of you guys who are listening, this year's been really hard, whether you've been laid off or you're transitioning or you're like, oh my gosh, I hate being at home doing this work, but I have no idea what I want to do next. This journal is going to help you get to the next level in your career, to really elevate your brain space around what your career is about, who you are in your career, and what's most valuable to you. So I really, really recommend the Career Map Journal. It's not only beautiful, it's going to be really functional. We've also made it really light. I'm a person who hates really thick journals. I hate really thick books because I lug my stuff around with me, right? If I'm going to a coffee shop or I'm going to a restaurant or I'm traveling, going home, I don't want to be carrying, and especially as we're hopefully, please Jesus, coming out of COVID and more states are opening up. There's going to be more flexibility and more travel. I don't want to be lugging around a big fat book. And so the Career Map Journal is really designed to be purse ready, right? So you just drop it in your purse. It's really lightweight. It's just big enough, and it doesn't make you feel like you're failing every day when you don't complete all the different nooks and crannies of the journal. So it's really, really simple because I'm simple and I need things to be simple. I don't need things to be complex and make me feel like a failure if I don't complete it. So if you want to get your hands on the Career Map Journal, again, we have a very limited supply of them. I did a very small run just to see people's interest and to get feedback. So you want to head over to recruittheemployer.com/journal. We have a very, very limited amount. We launched it yesterday. They are going fast. I want to make sure you guys get a copy. So again, recruittheemployer.com/journal. And for me, that is also my work win for this week. I'm really, really proud of the Career Map Journal. I'm proud that we launched it. It's been a dream of mine for a really long time, and it's been a long time coming. So we started the process and working on this. And I talk a little bit about this in yesterday's episode of when we started it, what that process was like and what I learned from that process. But we started at the end of last year. And so it is now May 5th and we have officially launched. So it's been a long time and I'm just really, really proud and excited about the Career Map Journal. So without further ado though, so again, if you want to get that, recruittheemployer.com/journal, it is now live. You can purchase this. Let us know if you have any questions or if you want to purchase a large group of them for your team, for your girlfriends, for maybe a group that you're a part of. If you're a part of an employee resource group, this would be a really great way to show some love to your coworkers, to your friends, to your boss. All right, so let's talk today a little bit about networking. We actually haven't done a networking episode in quite some time. And so I wanted to talk today specifically around fear of networking. And I got thinking to myself, I love networking. You've heard me talk about that before. I love networking. And I wanted to understand, why do more people not love networking? And it really comes down to this idea of fear. So today I'm going to actually be walking you through, and most of my clients are very much like you, right? They're like, I hate networking, Jena. I'm not a fan of it. I don't feel like I'm good at it. I feel sleazy. Well, the list goes on. So we're actually going to go through that list today of all the objections I hear from people, all the fears that I hear from people, and how I would recommend repositioning them in your brain or rethinking kind of some of the mindset you had around networking and how you can think about it positively instead of only negatively. So this whole episode is about overcoming your fear of networking. And, with my clients too, I started to realize I've been working with a lot of people lately. We actually had our biggest month in like a year and a half. Last month with just people. More and more companies are hiring, more and more people are realizing that it's important to invest in your career. We are booking up like crazy right now. But I was realizing that a lot of the people, I send a pre-needs assessment out. One of the first things that we do before we have our first call with somebody, just so I understand what I'm getting into, our team knows what we're getting into with a client. I ask them, what's your networking strategy? And everyone's like, I don't really have one. Or I know I need one, but I don't have one. That's why I'm here, right? And so the do you network question is obvious. We all know that we need to network, but there is this resistance that we hit, right? There's some resistance that we hit and then we push against when it comes to networking. So I just wanted to explore that a little bit more with you here today. So why do we fear networking? One of the number one reasons that I often see, and you probably relate to this, right? Is you're worried what people will think of you. If I'm networking with someone, we always think about ourselves, right? And at the end of the day, people are really just thinking about themselves. They're not really thinking about you. So it's kind of a ridiculous fear if you actually break it down, because at the end of the day, everybody is worried about themselves. They're actually not worried about the people in front of us. So we fear networking because we're worried what people are going to think. What that tells me, if we string that back a little bit, is that our identity is rooted in what people's opinions are of us. So I always joke when people say that, job searching and just your career in general is very transactional. This is really emotional, right? It goes back to our identity and our purpose. If we're worried about what people will think of us, we're not going to be as apt to network because we can't handle if somebody thinks poorly about us. And that really goes back to our identity, that our identity is rooted in what people think of us. So we got to be able to peel those layers back a little bit and realize our networking really isn't about worrying what people will think about us. We're worried that our identity is going to be blasted. We're worried that we're going to be told that who we think that we are is not who we are. Or we're relying on other people to tell us who we are. So we avoid networking because it feels really scary. And it feels like people might judge us. And then that's going to directly permeate us and make us feel like, oh gosh, we're just not worthy. Anybody relate? Am I preaching to anybody right now? Right? So we're worried what people will think. And this is one of the things that I learned early in my career. It was very hard for me in the beginning. I definitely, and I still worry what people think of me. And I know that I'm in an unhealthy season. I'm either burnt out or I'm online too much when I start thinking constantly about what are people going to think of me. If that's a phrase if that fear starts popping up a lot, I know that I'm unhealthy and I need to take a step back. So early in my career, this was the plague of my existence, right? I really worried about what people thought of me. I worried what my coworkers thought of me. I worried that I wasn't smart enough. I had massive imposter syndrome. And I just spent a lot of my time worrying instead of actually doing the thing that I needed to do to help move myself forward in my career. And so I just got to a point, it was after I was working at the New York Stock Exchange, I kind of had like a little bit of a recovery period after investment banking, where I started to gain a little bit of my confidence back. And I started to do some deep work. I definitely got more involved in my faith and really understood for me personally where my identity was rooted in. And I just realized I cannot worry. I cannot spend so much time worrying about what people are going to think of me because I'm actually not going to accomplish anything. And that very much translated to networking. I stopped worrying about what people would think of me, and I was just courageous and bold and just went for it. And some people, I can guarantee you, did think negatively about me. I can guarantee it. I know people did. At the end of the day, I don't really care. I know that sounds mean. I know that sounds harsh, but I had to get to a point where there will be some people that if I'm doing something worth something, people may not like me. It happens in my business, right? I cannot spend all of my time worrying about what XYZ random person thinks about me because ultimately they can't define my identity. I have to define my identity. My faith defines my identity. So we have to start breaking apart. Why are we actually worried about it and dig 3 levels deeper than what we think that we are? Why we're not networking. I know we're still talking about networking, right? It's much more existential than that. But we really do need to understand that our fear of networking comes from oftentimes worrying what people will think because we have our identity rooted in the wrong things. And when you start to free yourself up of worry, then you are free to make a fool of yourself because who cares? Right? There's great freedom in stop worrying about what people think of you. And that's when I saw a major shift in my career. It's when I saw a major shift in myself. I really started to develop and gain my confidence when I stopped worrying about what everybody was thinking of me and just been like, what's the worst that can happen? They can say something bad about me. Let me move on. Right? I know who I am. I know that I am well-intentioned. I know that I'm working really hard. And so if some people don't like that, that's okay. That's okay. And I want to encourage you, if you're listening to this, that if you know that you're a people pleaser and you're just worried what people are going to think about you, you are never going to push yourself to network or to do XYZ other things in your career. So I know I harped on that a lot, but I do think it's important because I think that's the foundation for a lot of these other fears, right? It all comes back to what we're worrying about what people will think. So that's the first one and probably the most important one. The second objection that I often get is I'm scared to keep the conversation going, which I thought was a really interesting one. And I definitely understand that because small talk is not fun. I don't like small talk. I'm a person where I can do the small talk, but I really like to develop rich relationships. And so for me, small talk feels unnecessary or it just feels fake or inauthentic, right? And so you have to free yourself of the realization that you don't have to keep a conversation going, right? So you can have a couple of questions that you put in your back pocket. We've done other episodes on how to practically do that. But you don't have to keep the conversation going forever. You can excuse yourself and say, hey, I just need to go to the bathroom, or hey, I need to go grab a drink, or it was so lovely meeting you. I want to make sure that I see other people in the room, right? You do not have to keep the conversation going. Okay. You don't have to think of like random things to talk about if you don't want to keep talking. Networking doesn't have to be long either. So I think this also goes back to a misunderstanding of what networking is. Networking isn't this long, drawn out conversation that's an hour and a half long. Networking can literally be 10 to 15 minutes. I was just networking, connecting. Again, I use those words interchangeably. I was connecting with the lady that's at the post office today. We were just connecting. It's essentially, I was networking with her. And we weren't talking about specifically job-related things, but I was still connecting with her, okay? So I don't have to be in there for 25, 30 minutes chatting about everything, although I probably could, because I do like to keep conversations going. I don't want you to fear that you have to have all of these things to say to somebody. You don't have to do that. So that's that. Hopefully that makes you think differently about that. Another objection that I get is they say, I'm fearful of the responsibility if somebody says yes. So we're almost like fearing success. This is not one that I've personally struggled with, but I do find that with people who have imposter syndrome, they almost like self-sabotage because they don't want to find success, because if they're then granted the responsibility of talking to someone, what if they screw it up, right? There's a fear of that. So that may be you. You may be fearful of that. Okay, let's say that I do reach out to somebody online, which we've done a whole episode on online networking. We'll include that into the show notes and link to that. But what if I do reach out to somebody on, online and they respond? What now? Oh my gosh, now I have to talk to them. What do I even say, right? We get this fear of like, what if someone says yes to connecting? So we have to get around that fear because if we live in that fear, we'll never put ourselves out there because we will fear success, right? I have some people who fear success and some people who fear failure. Some people fear both, right? So if you're fearful of the responsibility of someone saying yes, this is where having a plan and having a strategy really, really comes into play. And again, we've talked about that in past episodes, and we'll be doing a network to hire relatively soon, where we'll teach you how to actually network with someone. What do you say? What do you talk about? How do you practically go through those step-by-step process? So that's where having a plan is really, really helpful. I hear a lot of people tell me, on LinkedIn or, with clients or whatnot, they'll say, well, Jena, I'm just not a networker. So they've actually adopted that title for themselves and said, I'm not something, right? So anytime you say I'm not something, you are literally putting that on yourself. So, you can make the same analogy for athletics or, health and wellness. For a long time, I would say, well, I'm just not a healthy eater. And so then it became a self-fulfilling prophecy where I just became not a healthy eater. Because I was affirming that belief that I was not this type of person. Instead, I want you to say, I'm a non-sleazy networker. I want you to start repeating that to yourself. I'm a non-sleazy networker. Then you'll start to believe it. I'm not a sleazy networker. Okay. So you have to start labeling yourself as a networker to get over the fear of networking. Because if you're labeling yourself as somebody, and even if you don't say it intentionally, there's a subconscious thing that you're saying to yourself that's basically communicating to your body, oh my gosh, fear that thing because I can't do that. So we need to start adopting that title as a networker. I do the same exercise with women that are in the Recruit the Employer program, where one of the first things that we do, even before we talk about their experience, is we start to get them thinking about what does a successful career woman look like to them? And how do you start wearing that mantle? How do you start adopting those words to say about yourself? How do you say that you're an executive before you're an executive? I've heard of some authors who have been writing down for years, I'm a New York Times bestseller, before they were a New York Times bestseller. And it became the direction in which they moved their career and moved their business or moved their writing. And so for you, I want you to label yourself, I'm a networker. I'm a non-sleazy networker. If you need to say that to make yourself feel more comfortable, do that. But I need you to start to think, how would a networker think? What would they call themselves? They would call themselves a networker. Okay. So that's another one. Another one that I get is a fear of rejection. This is pretty obvious, right? So it goes right back to worried what people will think. It's very much correlated. This was one that I probably was more worried about. As an Enneagram 3, I feared failure. So I would often feared rejection, which is the same thing in this instance. And so rejection, when I got really friendly with rejection, when I said, rejection can't really harm me. It can redirect me. It can maybe just not work out. I'm going to learn something from it. But when I stop fearing rejection again, I start putting myself out there more. I'm more willing to fail because if I've established that it's not going to actually hurt me, then what's the big issue, right? What's the big issue with reaching out to somebody random and connecting with them? I've done this for authors. There was an author that I really admired. Some of you who are into journals, you may know Lara Casey, who founded the Make It Happen. I think that's the name of her company now, but she has those power pages, or I forget the name of the pages. I'm totally butchering it right now, but you know what I'm talking about if you know about Lara Casey. Well, a couple years ago, she wrote a book called Make It Happen. And Power Sheets, that's the name of it. I reached out to her because I read her book, and I had read in Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek that just try and reach out to people and see what happens. Because he was trying to make a point in his book that most people won't actually do that. And you may be the 1% that does. And so you actually probably would get a response. And she responded to me because I didn't care. Like, what was the worst that could happen? She ignores me. She's not going to remember me, right? So I reached out to her and she responded back. So it was such cool things that started to happen when I stopped fearing rejection. And I want to encourage you to do the same thing. When you stop fearing rejection, that's when you start applying to jobs. That's when you start networking with people. That's when you're not worried that if you do fail or you do get rejected, you're just going to keep on going. I had a client of mine where, she didn't get a job that she wanted. It was very upsetting, but she was able to bounce back after that rejection. She felt the rejection, right? We can't ignore our feelings and our emotions. But then from there, she's able to bounce back and keep going and had another interview like a couple of days later. So I just want to encourage you that just because you get rejected doesn't mean it doesn't work. And that's another one that I get from a lot of people is an objection is, well, I tried it and networking doesn't work. And usually if I dig a little bit deeper, it's they tried it once or they tried it twice. They tried it for a little bit of time and it wasn't really working. That's like saying, well, I just started my diet yesterday and I haven't lost 15 pounds. Of course not. Of course not. It hasn't worked yet. And it's those small incremental movements that you're going to have to make. And we live in an instant gratification world. We live in a microwavable world and we get really frustrated. I myself included. You can ask my husband. I get really frustrated when things take a little bit more time than I want them to. But what I have learned over the years is that if I try it once and it doesn't work, doesn't mean that that's 100% true 100% of the time. It just might mean that it might take time. And we're just not used to taking time, right? We're not used to taking time. And I want to encourage you that just because you tried it one time, it means you either didn't have the right scripts, the right strategy, you weren't consistent enough. Let it take time. Taking time doesn't mean it's not working. Taking time often means that it just needs to take time, right? My husband makes a chili and the chili takes a while to make because it's savory and all, you're getting all the juices and I don't know all the terminology because I'm not a chef. He is. And, getting all those spices and letting them simmer. So you've got to let some things simmer. And that's how relationship building is. If you don't want to be a non-sleazy networker, you're not just going to network when you need something. There's a woman that lives here in the Nashville area that, in my opinion, is a sleazy networker. She really only reaches out when she needs something from me. And I feel like that's very frustrating, especially when I've, asked for some connections. Those connections were never made. You don't want to be that type of person. So you have to expect that it's going to be a simmer. It's going to be a low simmer. It's going to take time. You've got to keep at it. You've got to keep having conversations. And here's the beautiful part about that. The more that you're having conversations, the easier it's going to get. The less you're going to get rejected. It's a numbers game. You're going to have more opportunities and you get one step closer to having more people network with you. Okay. And that was the other part of it is people don't want to be a sleazy salesperson. Well, those two things go in hand. You cannot just try it once because you haven't had any practice, right? So of course it's not going to work the first time. Maybe it will. And that's a really great win if it does. But for me, the first time I reached out to somebody, it didn't work, but I just kept going. I just kept doing it. And that's how I believe that I've made myself into be just a natural networker. I was in a women's group one time, and at the end of our group and our time together, we had to go around the room and write something nice about each person in the group. I've talked about it on the podcast before, and I have it hanging up in my office right now to remind me of who I am when I forget who I am. And there were all these wonderful things that people wrote about me. And somebody wrote, "I love your networking gift." That was what somebody wrote about me. And I take that as a huge compliment because I do love and enjoy getting to know people, but I know it's a slow simmer. I'm in it for the long haul. I'm not expecting a return on investment ASAP. We cannot expect a return on investment in networking ASAP. And that's why I really, really drive home. Don't just network when you need something, network all the time. Another objection that I get from people is, I'm introverted or I'm really shy. And I get that. I do get that. I do have some clients and I know that I'm an extrovert. So it's a little bit more natural for me to put myself in situations where there's larger groups, which to be perfectly fair, I don't love large networking groups and I'm an extrovert, but it's more likely that I'm going to feel more comfortable to do that, to quote unquote, work a room, talk to a lot of people. But I understand for my introverted friends and for those of you that are listening that tend to be a little bit more introverted, it can feel super, super intimidating. And this is where I think it comes down to strategy. I actually would never suggest for you to go to a big conference or go to a big room full of a bunch of people. I would actually suggest for you, and we've talked about this in past episodes, to strategically pick a couple of places that you want to network within, or a couple of people that you want to network with, and be very strategic and almost take ownership of those one-on-one conversations. And then also at the same time, if you know that you're an introvert, and that it drains you, it drains your energy, plan some time after that, block off the time to rest and to read and to recharge in whatever way that you recharge. Because while my extroverts are going to get on a roll with it, you just might not. And that's okay as well. So just being able to understand your own intricacies, right? And understand your own way that you work and your own way that you generate energy. It's okay to spend some time afterwards recharging. And I actually highly, highly recommend it. And I think, honestly, a lot of us got a little bit more introverted this year, just with being home and not having as many interactions. I remember the first time I went out to kind of a social gathering since COVID started, I turned to my husband afterwards, like, I'm so exhausted. There were so many people there and I was just exhausted. And there really weren't that many people. And a lot of these people I actually knew, but we're just not used to it. So give yourself some grace in the process. The other thing that kind of goes in tandem with this is like, I don't like going to events. If you don't like going to a networking events, or if you're going to say that in these unprecedented times, there's nowhere to network, how do you network? It's like, start building those one-on-one conversations. You have so many people already in your network that you could connect with. And then there's zillions of people that you can find on LinkedIn that I highly recommend doing. Again, we've done an episode on this. And you can reach out and make those one-on-one connections with people. Okay. So I've ruined that for you. If you really hate going to events, I really don't like going to big events. You don't have to go to big events. There's another way to network. It's reaching out to real people, having real conversations. And all of this, everything that we've talked about today really comes back to, one, being worried about what other people are going to think of us, right? Where we don't know how people are going to respond to us. We're fearing rejection. We're fearing failure. We're thinking it's not going to work. So we don't want to put the time into it. Or you're going to say, does this really work, Jena? Right? That's another narrative that may be holding you back and keeping you in resistance. It could also look like we just have a wrong viewpoint of networking. So it's first either that we're worried what people are going to think of us, or the other foundation that I see that we could root all of these fears back to is the wrong viewpoint of networking. And we've talked about this a lot, but I think what's really interesting, actually, I cannot take credit for this. I don't know where I read it, but somebody said, of course we don't like networking. We were taught at a very early age not to talk to strangers. And the idea of like stranger danger, which is so interesting. And I never really thought about that, but that's true, right? As young children, most of us were told like, don't talk to strangers. And so when we're being told now, please talk to strangers, it's a little confusing for years of our lives where we were told not to talk to strangers. And now we're told to flip that switch and say, you must talk to strangers now. That's the only way forward. And so it can feel very much like a tension. So I just think that's a really interesting piece of it. But also when we're thinking of networking, I think of it as really as connection, right? The viewpoint of networking should be true connection. I want to get to know somebody. I'm planning now to go down to the post office another day this week and drop off some mail instead of just like having somebody else go do it for me, because I want to build that relationship with that woman in the post office, because she's one, fabulous, and two, because I want to connect with her, right? So really, you could be networking in the grocery store. You don't have to be going to an event. It truly is just getting to know people, connecting with people, being open and willing to have a conversation. That is the key to the puzzle there. Okay. And the last thing that I want to talk about with relationship to how to overcome your fear of networking as it relates to the wrong viewpoint of networking is to play the tape through, right? What is the worst thing that could happen? If we're really looking at networking as truly as building connections, and we really do have the best of intentions in mind, and someone thinks that we don't, that's not our fault, right? Maybe there's some things that we could rephrase or a better strategy that we can implement. And that's the other thing people will say is, oh, I just don't know how. And so they just don't do it instead of figuring out what the plan should be, which I highly recommend when Network to Hire happens again, that you enroll because we give you the plan, we give you the script, so it doesn't have to be so difficult. But really, what's the worst thing that can happen? Let's play the tape all the way through. Let's say that they do think that you are a sleazy networker. You just don't have to talk to that person again. It's okay. You can move on. Now, is there something we could potentially learn from that? Maybe again, did I phrase it differently? Should I phrase it this way? But you can't be worried about what every single person thinks of you. Because if you're truly are honestly trying to build relationships and you really do look at networking as not just something that you can be taking from somebody else, but something that you can be giving as well, that's really where you're going to find success. So hopefully that's given you a good idea of how to overcome your fear of networking and made you think a little bit differently about, or one, recognizing the fears that maybe you have. Maybe you identified with the labeling yourself as I'm not a networker. Or like, I don't want to be sleazy. And you've associated those words together. Maybe you were like, wow, Jen, I never thought about the stranger danger thing. Or maybe you thought to yourself, I did try it once. I'm definitely one of those people who's made that excuse. I've tried it the one time and it didn't work, so I don't want to do it again. Or you just feel exhausted from it because maybe you think, well, I'm an introvert, only extroverts network. Hopefully I've made you think. I think I've covered pretty much every objection that I've ever gotten here today, guys. And you're starting to uncover and realize what are the things that are holding me back? And how can I actually start to mentally work through those things to get me to the other side where I'm not caring about what other people think of me, that I do have the right viewpoint of networking, and that I can ultimately decide, hey, this is what I want to try to do next because I believe that I deserve and that I want to network, and I'm going to blast through these fears. I would love to hear your thoughts. I would love to hear your biggest takeaway. If you're listening to this, DM me on Instagram or DM me on LinkedIn. I would love to hear which fear of yours did you feel like, gosh, that one really resonated with me. I definitely need to work on that. I would love to hear that. And until next time, guys, we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to the Recruit the Employer podcast. If you've been loving this podcast and it's been helping you approach your career in a brand new way, I have two shameless asks. Number one, make sure you hit subscribe right this very second. That way you won't miss a single episode. And number two, would you give us a review? Reviews help other ambitious career women like you know that this podcast is the place to be and helps the podcast climb to the top of the charts. Think of it as some good career karma. And as always, if you want to learn more about the topics we discussed today or are ready to take massive action and invest in yourself and your career, we would be honored to help you. Head on over to recruittheemployer.com/call to book your free strategy session. Regardless, we will see you next week.